Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most significant developments in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the destruction of Russia's land bridge and what it really means for the war. Going forward, this event has sparked debates across geopolitical, military, and strategic circles, and the implications reach far beyond the front lines. In this video script, we're going to break down what the land bridge was, why it mattered, how its destruction changes the battlefield, and what this could mean for the future of the conflict. The paragraphs will stay short, clear, and easy to digest, while the full script will run long enough to cover the entire issue in detail. The Russian land bridge refers to the corridor of territory running from Russia's border across eastern Ukraine, down through the Donbas, and into Crimea. After Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, establishing this land bridge became one of its major strategic goals. It allowed Russia to physically connect mainland territory to the Crimean Peninsula, which it annexed in 2014. This connection was not just symbolic. It was a lifeline for moving troops, equipment, supplies, and civilians. It also served as a protective buffer zone around Crimea. When analysts refer to the destruction of this land bridge, they're not talking about a single event or one operation. They're referring to a series of successful Ukrainian strikes, counteroffensives, logistical disruptions, and strategic maneuvers that have rendered parts of the corridor nearly unusable. Roads, railways, depots, and supply hubs have all come under heavy attack. Over time, the land bridge has become increasingly fragile, vulnerable, and operationally compromised. The area was crucial for Russia because it allowed movement without relying entirely on the Kerch Bridge. The Kerch Bridge has always been a vulnerable structure, even though Russia fortified it heavily. It was attacked multiple times by Ukrainian forces using naval drones and missiles. The more unstable the Kerch Bridge became, the more important the land bridge was as a secondary route. Without it, supplying Crimea becomes exponentially harder. Ukraine's strategy to target the land bridge wasn't only about pushing Russia back, it was about breaking Russia's logistical spine. Warfare isn't won only through battles. It's won by choking off the enemy's ability to sustain its war machine. By hitting supply routes, ammunition storage sites, rail transport lines, and command posts, Ukraine forced Russia into a reactive posture. That meant Russia had to move troops and equipment defensively instead of focusing on offensive operations. The destruction of the land bridge also hindered Russia's ability to rotate forces. When a military cannot rotate its units effectively, soldiers remain on the front lines longer, fatigue increases, morale drops, and combat effectiveness declines. Russian troops in southern Ukraine, especially around Melitopol, Tokmak, and Mariupol, depended heavily on stable supply channels. As these routes collapsed, their capacity to fight sharply deteriorated. The land bridge also mattered because it anchored Russia's southern defensive line. This line wasn't just a network of trenches. It included fortifications, anti-tank obstacles, minefields, strongpoints, and artillery positions. Breaking the logistical support behind those defenses makes them far less effective. Even the strongest fortifications can crumble if the units defending them are undersupplied and overstretched. Another consequence of the land bridge's collapse is its effect on Russia's ability to defend Crimea. Crimea is one of the most important regions for Russia, both symbolically and militarily. It houses major naval bases, electronic warfare installations, air defense systems, and logistical hubs. Without consistent supply lines, these assets become weaker. Ukraine's strikes on Sevastopol and other Crimean infrastructure were already causing damage. The weakening of Russia's supply routes now amplifies that effect. This also changes the strategic pressure on the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Ukraine has been able to push the fleet farther south and limit its operations. Without secure land connections, Russia's fleet becomes harder to supply, repair, and reinforce. This limits Russia's ability to control the Black Sea, use it for missile launches, or disrupt Ukrainian trade corridors. The destruction of the land bridge also forces Russia to reconsider its defensive priorities. It must decide whether to reinforce the south, the east, or Crimea itself. Reinforcing one area creates vulnerabilities in another. This divide and stress strategy is exactly what Ukraine aimed for. By making Russia defend a long, overstretched front with fewer reliable supply routes, Ukraine increases the chances of breakthroughs. But this development does not mean the war is suddenly over or that Russia has lost. Russia still controls significant territory. It still has a large number of troops, substantial firepower, and defensive fortifications. The destruction of the land bridge changes the strategic landscape, but it does not guarantee immediate Ukrainian victory. What it does guarantee is that Russia's logistical challenges will continue to grow, and those challenges will limit its operational options. For Ukraine, success in targeting the land bridge boosts morale. It shows that long-range strikes, drone warfare, and Western supplied systems are producing tangible results. It also strengthens Ukrainian arguments for receiving more weapons, particularly long-range missiles, demonstrating that strikes on infrastructure have strategic impact helps Ukraine's case internationally. This success also puts pressure on Russia internally. Russian citizens may not hear the full truth about the situation, but they do see the effects of supply shortages, inconsistent troop rotations, and rising casualties. These factors contribute to internal tension within Russia's political and military leadership. When territory becomes harder to hold, leaders face difficult decisions about troop deployments and priorities. Internationally, the weakening of Russia's southern corridor reshapes diplomatic perceptions. Countries monitoring the conflict, whether aligned with Ukraine, Russia, or somewhere in between, interpret these developments as signs of shifting momentum. Wars are not fought only on the ground. They are also fought through political leverage, international relationships, and the perception of strength or weakness. The collapse of a vital corridor damages Russia's image as a reliably strong military power. Meanwhile, Ukraine's efforts demonstrate adaptability and strategic intelligence. Even without matching Russia's manpower or artillery shell counts, Ukraine has been able to degrade Russian capabilities. This reinforces the idea that modern warfare depends heavily on precision, technology, and strategic targeting rather than sheer numbers. Another important factor is the impact on Russia's economy. Maintaining supply routes across contested or heavily damaged terrain requires more fuel, more vehicles, and more security resources. All of that costs money. Russia must spend more to achieve less. As sanctions continue and the war drags on, economic pressure compounds military pressure. A broken land bridge adds to that burden. The destruction of the land bridge may also influence Russia's long-term strategy in Crimea. If supplying Crimea becomes too costly or too dangerous, Russia may be forced to shift its priorities. While Russia is unlikely to abandon Crimea voluntarily, the weakening of its logistical lifelines introduces long-term instability. This instability creates openings for Ukraine in future offensives. From Ukraine's perspective, targeting the land bridge aligns with its broader strategy of attrition. Ukraine cannot match Russia's manpower one-to-one, but Ukraine can target the foundation of Russia's war effort. Each disrupted supply line, destroyed depot, or immobilized train weakens the Russian military machine. Over time, this cumulative effect can reshape the entire conflict. The destruction of the land bridge also affects the morale of Russian troops. Soldiers on the front lines who feel undersupplied, isolated, or abandoned are less motivated and less effective. Reports of supply shortages, poor food, limited medical evacuation options, and inadequate equipment have been circulating for months. The further collapse of logistics intensifies these problems. Another layer to this is the geographic factor. The land bridge ran through areas that Russia struggled to fully control. Local resistance, partisan activity, and Ukrainian special forces operations continued to challenge Russian presence. When key routes become compromised, Russia must divert troops to defend them, stretching its forces thinner. Ukraine's increasing ability to strike deep behind Russian lines also plays a major role here. Long-range missiles, drones, and sabotage units gave Ukraine options that were not available earlier in the war. These tools allow Ukraine to bypass front-line defenses and hit the infrastructure that keeps those defenses alive. This is exactly how a land bridge starts to crumble. The destruction of the land bridge also fuels Russia's sense of insecurity about Western support for Ukraine. Russia has always been wary of Western weapons that can target occupied territories. When Ukraine demonstrates that such weapons can severely damage Russian logistics, Russia's concern grows. This affects Russia's diplomatic messaging and may influence its decisions on escalation or negotiation. On the Ukrainian side, leaders must now determine how to capitalize on this strategic advantage. Should they push south toward Melitopol? Should they intensify strikes on Crimea? Or should they focus on the east? Every option carries opportunity and risk. The destruction of the land bridge opens possibilities, but does not dictate one clear path forward. Supporters of Ukraine often ask whether this development means Crimea could eventually be liberated. The honest answer is that it increases the possibility. A weakened and isolated Crimea becomes much harder for Russia to hold. But Crimea remains heavily fortified, and any offensive there would require substantial resources. Still, the weakening of supply lines is a necessary first step if Ukraine ever hopes to retake the peninsula. Another consequence of the land bridge's collapse is the ongoing evolution of warfare itself. This conflict has shown that traditional ground control is only one part of modern war. Cyber operations, drone warfare, precision strikes, and special operations have become critical. The land bridge's destruction is a direct result of these evolving tactics. It highlights how warfare is shifting from massed forces to targeted disruption. The event also demonstrates the increasing importance of intelligence. Ukraine's ability to identify high-value targets, track Russian supply movements, and coordinate strikes relies heavily on intelligence support from allies. The more accurate the intelligence, the more effectively Ukraine can hit Russia's logistical backbone. This partnership has played a major role in the land bridge's destruction. As the war continues, both sides must adapt to the new reality. Russia must find alternative supply routes, fortify vulnerable areas, and protect its logistical infrastructure more aggressively. Ukraine must decide how to exploit the weakened corridor without overextending its forces. The choices made now will influence the next phase of the conflict. The destruction of the land bridge also affects humanitarian conditions in occupied areas. When supply lines break down, civilians experience shortages of food, medicine, and essential services. This adds pressure on occupying forces and increases local resistance. Humanitarian crises can influence military outcomes, especially in contested regions. We should also consider the psychological impact. The land bridge was a symbol of Russian control and territorial ambition. Its collapse undermines that symbolism. It also strengthens the narrative that Ukraine can win strategically significant victories even against a larger adversary. Symbolism matters in war. It shapes morale, political decisions, and public perception. For Russia, rebuilding or securing the land bridge would require massive resources. Constant repairs, increased troop presence, and heightened defensive measures all come with costs. Ukraine, however, can repeatedly strike the same targets at relatively low expense. This asymmetry works in Ukraine's favor. The destruction of the land bridge also affects the timing of future operations. Russia must reconsider its calendar of offensives. It must delay or adjust plans due to logistical instability. Ukraine, on the other hand, gains flexibility in planning. With Russia on the defensive, Ukraine can choose when and where to apply pressure. This leads to a broader question about the war's direction. Does this development bring the conflict closer to an end? Not immediately, but it shifts the pressure. Wars often end not when one side is defeated outright, but when sustaining the conflict becomes unsustainable. The destruction of the land bridge pushes Russia a step closer to that threshold. As international audiences watch the situation unfold, this event may influence future aid decisions. Nations supporting Ukraine see the strategic value of continued assistance. Nations supporting Russia must reckon with the fact that Russian control is not as stable as it appeared. Neutral nations may reassess their positions as well. Economically, the land bridge disruption affects regional trade and movement. Supply shortages in occupied regions can lead to unrest. Russia must divert resources not only to the front lines, but also to manage these internal problems. This spreads its capabilities thin. From a political standpoint, Russian leaders must contend with the implications of this strategic setback. Domestic critics may question military leadership. International observers may interpret the collapse as evidence that Russia's strategic goals are failing. These political pressures can influence future decisions about escalation or negotiation. From Ukraine's perspective, the destruction of the land bridge represents a turning point. It validates the strategy of targeting infrastructure and demonstrates the effectiveness of modern weapons. It also shows Ukraine's resilience and determination despite challenging circumstances. Looking ahead, the situation remains fluid. Russia may attempt to rebuild or reroute supply lines. Ukraine may continue to strike deep into occupied territory. Both sides will adapt, but the fact remains, a critical component of Russia's military strategy has been severely weakened. In summary, the destruction of Russia's land bridge carries enormous implications. It disrupts supply routes. It undermines Russian defensive positions. It isolates Crimea. It forces Russia to rethink its priorities. It boosts Ukrainian morale. It shifts international perception. It increases political pressure on Russia. And it shapes the next phase of the war. This development illustrates how modern warfare is fought not only with tanks and troops, but with strategic disruption, intelligence, and precision. As we continue monitoring the conflict, the collapse of the land bridge will stand as one of the most significant turning points. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more deep dive analysis into global events and military developments.